Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Friday, February 4th, 2022, and today we're going to be taking a look at the states of North Carolina, Pennsylvania, Alabama, and Louisiana in discussion about how the Democratic Party received a multitude of victories today on behalf of many of these courts through the redistricting process that is going to be setting the tone for the next 10 years when it comes down to congressional elections. It is news piece after news piece that is really harming the GOP's chances at winning control in 2022 or potentially increasing the Democratic Party's prospects if they were to lose control of the House in 2022 at winning back control of the House in 2024. Now, everything that has been released today was something that we could have predicted from just a little while ago. We talked about how there were new things taken up by brand new courts and how congressional districts were going to be forcibly redrawn, how Supreme Courts were leaning away from the favor of the Republican or Democratic Party. And with all of that in discussion, we are now finally seeing on the same exact day as all of this happening, the Democratic Party really sees some very significant advancements when it comes down to the brand new maps that have been drawn. The biggest thing of today is that North Carolina's Supreme Court has struck down a GOP-drawn congressional map. Now, this will actually be further in discussion in tomorrow's video, talking about it a little bit more in depth. We're going to be flipping through about 4 states in this video, so there's a lot more to discuss than a simple, video on the Supreme Court in North Carolina, but there was a lot to unpack there. But what we do find is that the North Carolina Supreme Court has struck down this new GOP congressional map, and if you're wondering what it looked like before, let's go ahead and check it out. Now, the Republicans passed this map by party line vote back just a few months ago, and in that passing of the vote, it was forcibly drawn into the without permission of the governor of the state of North Carolina, and there really was no permission that needed to be passed. But that's why it made it to the state Supreme Court. Had the Democrats had tempered this with a veto possibility, it's entirely possible that this map would have actually been finalized with maybe an additional Democratic seat and then gone to the Supreme Court and upheld. Because the state of North Carolina isn't a Democratic state. It has been won by Republicans in every election in decades besides the 2008 election. In addition to that, Republicans seem to have always had the majority when it comes down to the North Carolina House delegation. And while the Supreme Court in North Carolina is controlled by Democrats, they upheld this brand new map from 2018 that was proposed and passed. Now, the North Carolina Supreme Court had a history of striking down maps, and they did so in 2018, saying that that map needed to be redrawn, and the Supreme Court forced it to happen. And in the new map that they approved, it actually gave the Republican Party 8 congressional districts and the Democratic Party just 5. Even though that wasn't a perfect representation of the state's ideology or the state's partisan vote share in the past, the Republicans on the court and the Democrats agreed that this map would suffice because while it may be advantaging the GOP, it was not a super large gerrymander and it wasn't super significant. You're talking about the Republicans at 8-5. But the Republicans decided to go for the gusto in this map. They did not expect it to go to the Supreme Court. I think this is the last thing that they were expecting it to do. And at that point, there was only a majority of 1 for the Democrats on the Supreme Court. So they were hoping that maybe they would pass it through without any concern. This new map that has now been stricken down gave the GOP a total of 10 districts that were considered to be safe or at least leaning in their favor, which means they would have been pretty solid in 2022. And of those leaning in their favor, they gave the Republicans a Republican plus 12 district and a Republican plus 10 district. Double-digit advantages for the GOP, which meant they would have the advantage. In addition to that, they took the 2nd congressional district, which used to be pretty solid for the incumbent there, which was the 1st, which used to have a partisan lean of Democrat plus 7, now has a partisan lean of Democrat plus 1. So this was an intentional gerrymander. It was meant to be for 2022. The Democrats only winning 3 out of the 14 districts, giving them a very minute sliver of representation. I believe 3 out of 14 in total. Let me go ahead and see here what that actually is. 3 out of 14 is 21% in terms of representation. So since the GOP decided to go with that, the Supreme Court, pretty much to summarize what they said, was that this was an unfair map, that this map needs to be stricken down, and they have 2 weeks to propose a new map. And the thing about this court ruling is that not only did it set the precedent that maps can be stricken down like the one in Ohio, it also made it so much worse for the GOP. Because looking at the old map, the Republicans could have ended up passing this map and sending it off to the Supreme Court, and because it is the same justices, they would have said, okay, that's fine. They would have been fine with that being the brand new map, and Democrats might have been disadvantaged, but the Republicans have already made it through with a map such as this. But now, because they have gone so harsh, the Supreme Court of North Carolina said that it must be proportional to the statewide vote. And considering that in the last election, the state of North Carolina voted for the Democratic Party more than they did the GOP in the House elections, I think the Democrats should be pretty happy about hearing about that. Because while the Republicans were still able to win the majority of seats here, the Democrats ended up winning 50% of the vote to the Republican Party's 49.4% across the state, which means that House Democrats actually outperformed Joe Biden. But since they didn't pass a map such as this, the Republicans here are now going to be forced, at least by what the court has said, to draw a proportional map relative to where the most recent House election vote and where the presidential election vote, which is about 50-50, which means you are going to be looking at a map with the Republicans in the upper hand by potentially just a singular seat, instead of being in the upper hand 11-3. That's why the GOP just suffered a major defeat out of the state of North Carolina, in addition to the one that just came out of Ohio and is expected to happen across many other states. But it wasn't just North Carolina. I mentioned multiple victories for Democrats tonight. Another one comes out of the state of Alabama. Now, it isn't a concrete victory. The Democrats don't have this completely locked down, but because the new Alabama map needs to be finalized, starting to be redrawn on Monday, that was the deadline that the Trump-appointed court ended up putting forth, the Supreme Court did not give a decision on the state of Alabama. They did not issue a stay. They did not issue anything. They did not even speak on this, Supreme Court case, which means they could be very well sitting on it, which also means it's good news for the Democratic Party, because since they didn't make a decision by 4 p.m. Central Standard Time, it means that they can simply just move on and potentially might even ignore this case altogether. It's not a guarantee, but it is a good sign that the courts did not hold up this process before the new map was drawn. Because that new map is going to be drawn, it's going to be very difficult to try to make that argument that all of a sudden now you are making the decision. It hasn't stopped the Supreme Court before, but it definitely is outside of precedent and does end up looking bad for the courts, which means they probably aren't going to do it. No guarantees. I think that there's definitely something that could be, walked back upon, but I certainly see this as a minor indication that the Democratic Party might be on the pathway to victory in Alabama. I think that's really where you start to see the concern here. And if you want to know what happened in Alabama, I'm going to summarize it for you very quickly. The previously enacted proposal, as 538 describes it, was this map that gave the GOP a total of 6 districts to the Democratic Party's 1 district. That's how it has been for 30 years now, and it hasn't been contested by the Democratic Party in the state of Alabama until this election year, in which there was an argument made by a process for, I'm not exactly sure the exact name of the organization that put this forward to the 3-panel judge, but the 3-panel judge, for context, was all Republicans, 2 of which were appointed by President Trump for this position, and they ruled in a decision 3-0 that Alabama needed to draw an additional majority black district. And knowing anything about American politics, you will know that the most reliable group for the Democratic Party, without question, is the black vote. And looking at what happens when it comes down to districts that need to be drawn in coordination with the Voting Rights Act, you will find that that puts the Democratic Party in the majority in that majority black district, specifically because it is hard to elect a black representative through the Republican Party. It's a whole issue about, a majority black Democratic primary leading to potentially a black representative in Congress, minority interest represented in Washington, D.C. All of those things are brought into consideration, and what the Alabama courts ruled was that 1 district was not enough. They ruled it was not enough because there is a 26%, by the most recent census data, 26% of all Alabama citizens are black, which means that if you provide them with just 14% representation in Congress through a singular congressional district, Alabama 7th, it is not fair, and you are diluting and underrepresenting minority voters. That in addition to that, what you will find is that this really jeopardizes the GOP's chances at future victories because it adds an additional district that Democrats were never counting upon. So what you've heard so far is that North Carolina has been stricken down. What this means is that that map is going to be a part of the states affected map that we're talking about here. Alabama has already been stricken down, but the Supreme Court has yet to speak on it, but their silence does indicate somewhat good news for the Democratic Party. I could be completely wrong. They could completely walk back on it, but historically speaking, they don't. In addition to Alabama being affected, you might have noticed that the first map that I showed you by accident was Louisiana, but in fact, it was no accident. And the reason why I tell you that is because the Republican Party has put forth a brand new map that is very similar to this one. These are the only 2 proposals, and what you can see from the partisan breakdown is that it is not different from what we are currently used to. And what we are currently used to is 1 singular congressional district for the Democrats and 5 for the GOP. Every single one of these GOP seats is considered safe. 31, 41, 32, 39, 26, it really isn't competitive. And Democrats are drawn into a district that is protected by the Voting Rights Act. It is a majority-minority, majority-black district, Louisiana's second. And again, like in Alabama, it is made to represent minority voters in Congress. But with this Alabama map being stricken down, there is a very real possibility that if the GOP decides to push this forth, that this same thing could happen in Louisiana. Because looking at the state's electoral breakdown and looking at the state's demographic breakdown, what you will find is that black voters do make over a fourth of the state's population, which means if you are providing them with a singular congressional district, 1 out of 6, you are providing them with a total number of 16.67% representation, underrepresenting and diluting minority voices in Louisiana and in Washington, D.C. So if a precedent has been set in Alabama, it could very well happen in the state of Louisiana. And the interesting thing about this is that while the Republicans have put forth these two maps that keep the status quo, the governor here is a Democrat. And because Republicans do not have the numbers to overturn his veto with a supermajority, that actually means that there could be a forcibly drawn second district and it won't need to go to court. The Republicans have already decided to vote against all of the provisions that include a second congressional district, pretty much wanting to maintain the status quo. But if Governor John Bel Edwards decides not to sign off on it, there's nothing the GOP can do. Unless they garner Democratic support on this, which doesn't seem likely, it will likely end up being in a position where it gridlocks and then a decision is made by the courts. And if Alabama has anything to say about it in terms of precedent, in terms of a most recent court case, Louisiana could also end up with an additional district. The silence from the Supreme Court really should, in a way, worry the GOP in the state of Louisiana, because like Alabama was unexpected, it could also be unexpected. So we've talked about North Carolina, we've talked about Alabama, and we have now talked about Louisiana. But the final state I want to talk about is actually the state of Pennsylvania. The state of Pennsylvania has not passed a brand new map. And the reason being that the commission here and the debates between Democrats and Republicans came too heavy, so the Democratic-controlled Supreme Court now has total control. And they decided to appoint someone who was a part of this gridlock decision where they are now able to, a mediator, a special master, that is drawing brand new districts for the Democratic and Republican parties. And the reason why that is good news for the Democratic Party is because Republicans actually control the state legislature in the state of Pennsylvania. The House of Representatives is 109 seats for the GOP. 113, and the Pennsylvania Senate is 28 seats for the GOP, and the Democrats are at 21. Now, that's good for the GOP because they have control over the state legislature, but it doesn't result in a Republican gerrymander in the map. That's because Tom Wolf is there, and Republicans don't have the numbers to, in any way try to oversay whatever he says. But now it is at the Supreme Court, and instead of the Republican Party having the ability to draw a new map, they instead are being hindered by this Supreme Court, and we'll show you what they have already released in the state legislature. Because not only has the House map here been taken up for the special master to draw, they actually are drawing the brand new state legislature rankings, legislative districts, and they have already been released, and they are pretty bad news for the GOP. But just as a brief understanding of where the map is right now, the Republican Party currently has a total number of 9 districts with an additional 3 congressional districts that either have a Republican lean in one, an even lean in the other, and a narrow Democratic lean of 1% with a Republican incumbent. Meaning that these 3 districts, if they were to hold, would give the Republican Party potentially an advantage in the state of Pennsylvania with a total number of 12 congressional districts to the Democratic Party's 6. You can see there why there is a point of concern. Even in a normal type of year, the Republicans could also do that as well. But here's the thing. Looking at this map, the Republican Party will likely not have a map as favorable as this one after the special master is done. I remind you that in the House of Representatives election in Pennsylvania, the GOP won 113 seats. Even though they were able to win the popular vote by about 5 points, that gave them 23 more districts over the Democratic Party. Interesting, nonetheless. But looking at the new map that has been drawn in the state of Pennsylvania by the special master, again, a further indicator of what we might expect on the congressional map, he drew a very fair map. And this map ended up with 103 Democratic seats for Biden if the 2020 election results were put in, giving Donald Trump the remaining 97. Another interesting thing to look at this is that in 2016, when Hillary Clinton lost Pennsylvania, get this, the Democrats still would have won 99 Democratic-leaning seats, Democratic seats in the House of Representatives. So even with Joe Biden's victory, what you find is that the Democratic Party only won 90 out of the total number of 203 seats in the Pennsylvania House of Representatives. 203, and the Democrats won statewide, but only won 90 districts. Very interesting, if you ask me. Looking at those results, I would say that this brand new map definitely is an advantage for the Democrats if they were able to replicate a 2020 type of margin. The most astounding part of this, that if the governor election results from 2018 were applied, what you would find is that the Democratic Party would win 131 of these districts. Again, further indicating that this new map might be more favorable for the Democrats. In fact, more than likely will be from what we have gathered from the state legislature. In addition to that, we have the state Senate, where the Republicans currently hold 28 districts to the Democratic Party's 21. There's a total number here of 50 in the state Senate, and there's 26 needed for a majority. Well, get this. The Supreme Court in Pennsylvania also struck down the state legislature maps, or not necessarily struck down, decided to draw them. And in this new map, what you will find is that it actually is very fair. It gives Joe Biden 25 districts and the Democrats 25 in this brand new map. But if we apply the governor election result from 2018, you actually end up with Democrats at 32 Democratic seats. The 2016 presidential results would give the Democrats just 23 seats, but anything is an improvement from the 21 where they are right now. Which tells me that no matter how 2022 ends up, you can likely expect Democratic gains in the Senate elections and in the House of Representatives elections in the state of Pennsylvania, which should be a worry for the GOP. At the end of the day, everything that has been released today from North Carolina to Alabama to the state of Pennsylvania all sort of indicate that the results in many of these court cases are going to be favorable for the Democratic Party. The House elections aren't going to come as easy to the GOP as they might expect, and taking a look at the national overview and the change from the old maps, everything sort of adds up. The Democrats are now advancing from where they were before, and it looks like they might actually, climb back up to the position of where they were before the process altogether, despite the Republican Party. And I need to remind you of this because it is fascinating to see how Democrats actually ended up in the upper hand, despite the GOP being able to control 100 more districts than the Democratic Party. Quite fascinating to see. But at the end of the day, looking at our brand new congressional map, looking at our brand new congressional districts, the Democratic Party might suffice significantly better from where they were following the past redistricting cycle, and also state legislatures seem to be, telling the signs about how some special masters might end up drawing future maps in some of these highly contested swing states. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the bottom left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video you can watch, and then a playlist for my 2022 election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all tomorrow.